A week in politics, of course, is a very long thing, especially with the changes happening in the US political scene. This time last week, I was asking the question whether or not Kamala Harris had what it took to change the tide in the US elections. Oh, no, actually, that was 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? Time flies when you're having fun. Tash McGill joining me on the program. Kia ora, Tash.
Kia ora, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to chat with you. Now, things have moved on in the US elections. Of course, Kamala Harris has made a decision of saying, hey, this is going to be my running mate. I suppose the board is set, the pieces are moving, to quote Gandalf on this one. But has much changed in the last fortnight in terms of predictable outcomes, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's important to just state for the record, as far as predictable outcomes go, I would just like to take the credit, because were we not here a week or so ago, as I said, 2 weeks ago, as I said, you can bet your bottom dollar Kamala Harris will end up choosing somebody who is at the more conservative end of a white male to be her running mate to kind of round out that bucket. And sure enough, ex-school teacher, Army Guard veteran, Tim Walz, what a candidate, governor from Minnesota. Not somebody that she had a particularly, public or well-known or well-established relationship with. But again, goes to show she's looking for a particular skill set and something that's also going to represent well to the majority. So that's kind of the first thing that's changed. So well done, you and I, who made that prediction.
Exactly. And to put it in the context of radio parlance, it's kind of like if you have co-hosts on a show and essentially they've got the same personality, you're not really broadening your audience appeal, and they're both likable and they both agree with each other, but you're not necessarily stretching the relational dynamic, and you're not broadening the type of people that are likely to listen to your radio show. Turns out same's true for US politics, right?
Well, not quite, because they do come from slightly different backgrounds. So I think they are in this instance amplifying their audience and their reach. So for some voters, they are still, you got to remember, there's a lot of voters in America that are still 60 plus years of age who are going to, the commentary around, in fact, I believe Trump actually said in an interview, she's only 60. She's only 60. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Dealing in geriatric politics for the last decade. We should possibly be grateful for that. But for some they are going to potentially struggle with the idea of voting for a woman. So this offers some of that, slightly older, slightly broader appeal. He's an army guy. He's a little bit blue collar, but in a way that's very respectable. Whereas Kamala, part of her trajectory into politics is that she's always been an activist. She's always been involved in sort of social reform, and then from a prosecutorial perspective. So I do think there is a little bit of broadening of the spectrum.
Exactly.
Here's the big thing that indicates to us that actually there is a broadening of the spectrum. And I don't know if you saw this news this week. But there is a well-known signed-up member of the Republican Party who also happens to be mayor of Mesa in Arizona, which is a relatively large town. And he came out this week with a public statement of endorsement for not Trump, but Kamala Harris.
Wow.
A public statement saying that it has become clear throughout this election cycle so far that what matters is competency and character. And therefore, his statement and his urge for Republicans in his town and in his state is for them to actually go out and vote for Kamala Harris in her run for the presidency, because character matters more than anything else. Now, that is a major statement. Now, I mean, let's be fair. The mayor of Mesa, Arizona, not necessarily a large, well-known or particularly vibrant political character. Neither's Tom Walz, the new VP running mate. But that is an extraordinary piece of news this early in the campaign. And given that Trump can't quite decide still whether or not he's even prepared to front up and debate Kamala Harris on a presidential debate stage, what we are seeing are members of the Republican Party jumping ship left, right, and center and saying, hey, this guy, no longer our guy. And how quickly from just a few weeks ago, post that assassination attempt, where we were thinking, oh my goodness, this has really swung into his favor. In fact, he looks like, I mean, for right now in this particular moment, he looks like he's crumbling and doesn't really have a strong answer.
To be fair, I can understand Trump's hesitancy in debating Kamala Harris, particularly given that she's only 60. I mean, what could she contribute to the conversation? Well, not quite 60, as it turns out. One of the things I think interesting about the story with the mayor from Arizona is that that Arizona, that dry belt, if you like, that's an important swing state. If the people of Arizona go Democrat instead of Republican, that could make a huge difference in the overall result for the presidency, much more so than Minnesota, which has always been a strong Democrat state.
Absolutely. Now, so what's important, just to cover off here briefly, is that if you get confused as to how on earth could it possibly be, we've had this in a couple of elections recently, that somebody clearly winning the popularity vote still doesn't become president.
Yep.
It's because of the Electoral College. And so each state has a certain number of votes in what they call the Electoral College. So if you win that state, it's still the representatives of the Electoral College in that state that cast the vote, and that actually determines the winner of the presidency. So some of these strategic kind of places where Republicans and Democrats as a party are making strong moves does have large implications for the upcoming result of the presidential election. A couple of other things that I think are worthwhile to bear in mind is that there has been a little bit of a turning of the tide in the media coverage, because obviously, we've had some issues. I think we've spoken really clearly about some of the challenges that Joe Biden has faced in terms of his ability to communicate in a really coherent fashion. Arguably, Trump equally incoherent and incomprehensible at times.
Yeah.
What has started to happen is that the trend towards journalism is now really moving to highlight the difference between the way that Kamala is conducting herself on the rally tour versus Trump. So some examples of that being recently, Kamala Harris walked into an Atlanta rally. There were 4.5 minutes of standing ovation and applause.
Yeah.
That has not been seen. In fact, not even seen during Obama's election campaign run-up.
And again, back to the swing states, Georgia is a key state, and that was the one that Trump got so grumpy about last time, phoning the governor and saying, you need to find me some votes. Places like Arizona, places like Georgia, these are the states that the candidates really need to win if they're going to be president, right?
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, this is where it really comes into play. For a lot of people, their uncomfortable tension between, Biden, very, clearly old, clearly struggling to keep up, and Trump very scarily talking about doing things like people not having to vote again because he was going to fix the system. And in particular, a number of those comments were directed towards Christians, that if Christians would just get out and vote for him this time, he would make it so that they wouldn't have to vote again because everything would be secure in their favor. What? Handmaid's Tale, anyone? What? So what happens is when you change out Biden's conversation and his campaign points for now somebody who is very clear, very directive, and able to go toe to toe in a very clarifying way, all of a sudden the media story looks very, very different when you're contrasting these two candidates versus who was being compared and contrasted before. And I think that really is starting to give people a sense of relief, as we've talked about, that there is in fact somebody who can string sentences together, but also can articulate a clear understanding of how democratic principles work and what good government looks like. So we may still yet, have some light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, exactly. Although, to be fair, you say there's a change in media, but that depends on which silo you're looking up from, honestly, because the media, particularly from the United States point of view, is probably just as tribal as many other aspects of society. So the Trump media is, the people that are pro-Trump are telling a very different message than other parts of the media. And for many Americans, they live in these specific media silos. They only hear the messages that they want to hear. And hey, it's going to take a lot to break through those silos for a broader message to be communicated across the American public, perhaps.
That is very true, but as ever, there are some key indicators and temperature gauges that we want to keep an eye on as we watch this thing roll out. So one of those is Fox News, traditionally very Republican, traditionally very secure in that kind of red state. Here's how things really are. But what has started to shift here, and it's been happening for the last kind of 6 to 8 months, is that more and more of those Fox-centered, those right-wing centered political commentators are starting to articulate even further that perhaps competency is more important than the political agenda. And one of the ways that you see it is their willingness to point out the misalignment between Trump's values as a candidate and the things that he's talking about and the actual historic and current values of the Republican Party. And so that's where you really do start to see that Trump is not as well aligned with his own party as perhaps he would. And some of the commentaries really come out strongly around his selection of running mate. There was certainly a sense of confidence that J.D. Vance would really swoop up with his strong emphasis on family values, that he would really swoop up a lot of that more extreme right-wing kind of voting ground. Mm-hmm. That has yet to actually be seen or reflected in the polls. In fact, Vance has been tanking, and that's across the media spectrum, right wing, left wing facing. And so, I do think, again, media is an important thing to watch because it's a good temperature gauge. Yeah. It's never as reliable as, actually just seeing how the results turn out the day after.
And in particular, as you mentioned, when people start, I suppose, swimming against the tide, going against type, Republican mayors from Arizona saying, hey, I'm not backing Trump anymore. This is where we're perhaps seeing a bit more of a seed change more deeply within the American public opinion, if we can personify the opinion and wills of millions of people. But anyway, interesting times indeed, and interesting commentary as always. Tash, thanks very much for your time today.
Cheers.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.